So we are doing video notes for the first time. This is not meant to be any more difficult, just so that we can have more time in class to get through things and see things and spend a little bit less time on direct instruction in the classroom. These notes are going to be due on Thursday, so make sure you complete and answer the questions as you watch, and then come to class with the notes completed on your notes sheet and any additional questions that you may have as we go through. So this is our intro to the skeletal system. We're going to look at the identity and the classification of different bones of the skeletal system. So starting off with the overview. What we need to make sure that we understand is when we talk about systems of the body, the skeleton is an actual system, and it's a system because it's made of more than one thing. When we look at the skeleton, it's composed of bones, cartilage, joints, ligaments, all of the above all together. When we think about the skeletal system, yes, it's mostly bone. We have cartilage that's seen in isolated areas, usually connecting points, and then we also have ligaments whose job is to connect bones and to reinforce particular joints and make them a little bit more stable. The skeleton accounts for 20% of your body mass. So when we think about how much we weigh, 20% of that is our skeletal system. And as we'll see as we move throughout this unit, both before winter break and after winter break, there are two major divisions, the axial and the appendicular skeleton. Now, when we think about bones, what we need to understand is why is our skeletal system here? And there are 7 major important functions of what our bones enable us to do throughout our time. So number 1, it's there for support. It gives our body support and also our soft organ support. Think about like your heart is protected behind your rib cage, etc. It's there for, again, protection, brain, spinal cord, vital organs. It allows your body to move. So think about levers for muscle action. Think about when you do a bicep curl or straighten that arm back out again. 4, mineral and growth factor storage. So now allowing us to grow, we do have growth factor reservoirs in our bones, and that enables us to grow throughout our lifetime as well. There's blood cell formation. It occurs in red marrow cavities of certain bones. Number 6, our bones do store fat. It's used as an energy source. It's stored in bone cavities. And lastly, our bones have hormones. Osteocalcin is secreted by bones to help regulate insulin, glucose, and other various modes of metabolism. So those are the 7 major functions. Those are things that our skeletal system is doing for us on a daily basis. Now, when we classify bones, bones can actually be grouped into different categories. So first thing you need to know is there are 206 named bones in the human skeleton. You're not going to have to know every single one. You will have to know a lot of them, though. They're divided into 2 groups based on their location. So, of course, the axial skeleton is going to be along the long axis. So think about straight down the center, like you see here in the dark orange. That's going to be your skull, your vertebral column, your rib cage. And then we have the appendicular. That's the light tan around here. Everything that's attached to that. So your bones of your upper and lower limbs. So think about your arms, your legs, as well as the girdles, your shoulder girdle. Okay, think about your clavicle, etc. And your pelvic girdle. So what makes up your pelvis? All of that is considered the appendicular skeleton. So we have axial, center of the body, midline, and then appendicular, everything that attaches to that point. Now, bones are also classified by shapes, and there's one of 4 shapes that you'll always see. So we have long bones. They're longer than they are wide. Think about your limbs. Think about your arms and your legs. Your arms and your legs definitely have more length than they do have width. Short bones, these are found in your wrist, your ankle. Those are going to be more cube shaped. We even have a sesamoid bone, your patella, how it sits in between your tendon and why it can move back and forth easily sometimes. Short bones are varied in size and number, so there's no one distinct way they're going to look. The third group are your flat bones. They're thin, they're flat, slight curve to them. Your skull is an example, your sternum, your scapula that makes up, the back of your shoulders, all of that's going to be your flat bones. And then of course we have these wonderful irregular bones. They have a weird, complicated shape, and most of the time when we think about irregular bones, you think about your hips and you think about your vertebra, and you can feel like the weird, complicated shapes, the kind of projections that they have if you feel like your hip. And you can even feel down the back of your spine, and you can feel, the edge that your vertebra have along the back. So if we were to take a look at some of those, here's what they look like. So here's your long bone, longer than they are wide, irregular bones, so no distinct shape. These are going to be your short bones. Again, very strange looking shapes. They're not going to be the same, so the way they look in your wrist or your ankle is not going to be exactly the same. And then of course examples of some of those flat bones like your skull or your sternum. So we're going to start today just by talking about the axial skeleton. You do have a packet of colored diagrams, especially of the skull. The skull bones are hard to identify, so make sure you have the colored packet with you. And as you see bones highlighted, I want you to circle or highlight those. Those are going to be ones that you need to make sure that you are able to identify. You won't have to know every single one, but you do have to know the main bones. And so as you see them highlighted on my slides, you need to make sure you highlight those so that you know what we're talking about. So first off, the overview of the axial. So we're looking at what we have highlighted here in blue. Again, think midline. So you have your skull, you have your vertebral column, you have your thoracic cage. Even though it's only that, there are 80 bones. We're going to see all the different bones that make up the face, plus all of our ribs, plus all of your vertebra. Lots and lots of bones that make up that particular category. The axial has three major functions. So when we think about what the center of our body is going to do, it's there because it forms the longitudinal axis. It's going to support your head, neck, and trunk, and it protects your brain, your spinal cord, and all of the organs of your thoracic region. Now the skull, we're going to spend a lot of our time on the skull. So the skull is the most complex bony structure of the body. It's formed by two major sets of bones. So you have one, the cranial bones are also known as the cranium. This is where your brain is enclosed. It provides also attachment for head and neck muscles. So cranium, top portion, head and neck muscles attached there. That's why you're able to move your head and neck. That's also why, you get whiplash, it hurts in your neck. It's protecting your brain as you're doing that, but you're straining those muscles. And two, we have our facial bones. So now we're thinking about all of the framework of your face, openings for air, openings for food, contains cavities for special senses. These are also going to anchor muscles for facial expression. You'll notice a trend here. Not only are we going to look at bones, but these bones are attachment points for muscles that allow for movement. So that's a key connection between skeletal system and muscle system, is understanding both of those mechanisms. Most skull bones are flat and they firmly lock together except for the mandible. So your mandible, lower jaw, that is not going to be locked in tight. It allows for movement, again, chewing, moving of your jaw, but also can be easily disrupted. When we talk about your skull, even though they are locked together, those joints are called sutures, and that's because we had to grow into our skull as we were babies. We had soft spots, and we'll talk a lot about that as we move on towards the end of this unit when we look at the development of our skull. So here's the skull geography. You guys have this picture on your notes sheet. So we're going to take a look at some of the major areas. So this is if we were to cut the skull in half, you have the lower portion that we're seeing. We're not seeing the top chunk. So this view is actually the bottom of your skull. Like if we were to cut this skull in half and this way, this is what we're seeing. So this hole is where your vertebrae comes in. Okay, this is cutting it in half horizontally. This would be, or this is a vertical cut, excuse me, this would be a horizontal cut. So the cranium is divided into a vault and a base. This would be the base, okay, the bottom of your skull. The vault, what we're not seeing, the top, that would be all of this up here. That is going to be the superior portion, the forehead, all of that. That's where your brain actually sits, is in the vault. The base informs the inferior or below aspect of your skull. So here's your base, okay? This would be your vault, where your brain is stored. Now, when we think about the base, all of this, the base is divided into 3 parts. You have the anterior, you have the middle, and you have the posterior. So remember, anterior is front, middle, okay, and posterior. Fossa are going to be spaces. So when we have the anterior space, the middle space, and the posterior space, okay. Brain sits within these fossa. They're referred to as a cranial cavity. So a fossa, again, is the space. That's where the brain is going to plop down and sit right here. So the brain sits on top, and then most of the brain in this upper space, that's what's known as the vault. There are other cavities when we think about your skull. A cavity is a space as well, an opening where something is going to sit. So there are other cavities, not just the fossa. You have middle and inner ear cavities. You have your nasal cavities. You have your orbits where your eyes are going to sit. So a cavity is where something else is going to come into play. You're not going to see all surrounded by bones. The skull in itself has 85 named openings. Again, you won't have to know all of those. But what we do have to understand is what they're called. So there are things like foramina, there are things like canals, there are things like fissures. Those are going to be passageways. So a foramina, a canal, or a fissure is going to be some kind of an opening that something passes through it. So the big foramina, that's where your spinal cord goes through. Smaller ones, you're going to see blood vessels, you're going to see nerves, all of those things that are going to happen in that general area. Now, cranium, when we think about the cranium, okay, this is what the cranium looks like. So again, you have this colored portion. As we start getting through and looking and identifying, you need to be able to mark off these structures. The cranium is composed of 8 cranial bones. These are the bones you need to know. So you have your frontal, you have your parietal shown here. Okay, we have one on the left, one on the right. You have your occipital bone. We can't see that in this view. That's going to be in the back. Okay, temporal, think about your temples near your ears. So that's here and here, right and left. And then you have your sphenoid and your ethmoid. They're going to help make up your nasal cavities. So if we look, again, these are what we want to be able to mark down on your sheet. So definitely need to know parietal. You have to know your nasal bone, that's here in blue. Sphenoid, back of your eyes, okay. Temporal, zygomatic, and that's going to make up our arch of our cheeks. Maxilla, mandible, you have your vomer inside your nose, the nasal concha, okay. And then you have your frontal bone. So make sure we know those. Ethmoid should be there. If we see the ethmoid, that's what hangs down in the back of our nasal passages as well. Another view of the base of your skull, so we can see where some of these bones come in. You can see temporal as part of your base. You have your occipital as part of your base. You can see a little bit of the parietal. There's your frontal, and then you have your sphenoid, which makes up, again, back of your eye sockets, etc.